everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Urge Artifacts. Today I'm going to be doing my long overdue ranking and review of the Siege of Terra from the Horus Heresy series. I do a ton of Horus Heresy videos on my channel. It's my current and maybe favorite book series of all time. If you look right there behind me, you can see my collection of all the hardcover and limited editions of the books, and we'll be focusing right up there on the Siege of Terra. I finished this series some time ago, but I'm getting pumped up for it again because they have maybe the final Siege of Terra book, the anthology Era of Ruin, coming out. Now, I will say that I predicted that there would be an anthology of this series about midway through the Siege of Terra. I also predicted that there would be 3 End in the Death books. I'm just saying. But like I did for the main Horus Heresy series, today I'm going to do a full ranking of all 13 Siege of Terra books, including the novellas. I did put them in there, didn't want to leave them out. And for the primary series, since there was 54 books, I did 1 minute per book, kind of like quick hitters. For this, I'm going to spend a little bit more time. I'm going to do about maybe between 2 and 3 minutes per book. There's a lot of great stuff to talk about. And during my review, I'll provide a little overview of the book itself with some of the overall themes and why it got the ranking it got. I'm also going to really speak off the cuff about my favorite parts of the book and really keep it focused on those big moments that I personally liked a lot. Now, I will say, even though this is a ranking, I did enjoy all of the books. I'm not prone to giving a lot of really negative criticism, though where I think appropriate, I will give some light criticism. But for the most part, this ranking is going to be focusing on the highlights and why I rank these books the way I did. Of course, if you haven't read the books yet and you don't want spoilers, please don't watch because this is going to be spoilers galore. So let's not waste any more time and let's get into it. So at number 13, we have The Sons of Selenar. So this story is a novella that follows the group from the Sisyphean, which we have seen in many stories thus far. The notable characters being Nakona Sherikin and Sabik Wayland. And this kind of concludes their whole arc of the entire Horus Heresy series and leads to some big repercussions at the end. Alright, so here's the book Sons of Selenar, a nice little novella that we had released early on in the Siege of Terra. Now, I enjoyed this book. The Sisypheum was one of my favorite little subplots throughout the series. I liked a lot of Graham McNeil's book that included these characters, Sherikin, Wayland, and the rest of the crew. But this book is just a very small footnote in the Siege of Terra itself, so it's not as grand, as exciting as the other ones. That being said, seeing the conclusion of our team was great. The highlights of this book probably come at the end because there's not really a ton of fighting. You don't get to see Sherikin like kick ass like he usually does. But there's 2 highlights at the end of this book. One is when the Photep, Magnus's flagship, kind of saves the members of the Sisypheum by shielding them from another strike cruiser. This was cool because it had payoff to a former book in which Magnus indicated to Alfarius not to kill Sherikin. He didn't want him dead. And then you get to see that payoff because Sherikin presumably survives. There's huge tie-ins to later on in regular 40k with Belisarius Call and Primaris Project. So I think without that payoff, this would have just been like a nice, enjoyable read. But with that, it really earns its place in the Siege of Terra, and I'm glad it was included. All that being said, had to be number 13 though, because there's just not enough meat here to compete with all the rest of the books. At number 12, we have Garro, Knight of Grey. And it's very clear that this book was specifically added just to conclude Garro's story. He's been very active in the Siege of Terra and was very prominent in the rest of the Horus Heresy series. So this book leads right into his final confrontation and showdown with Mortarion. It's the shortest book in the Siege of Terra series, but it's very poignant if you're a fan of Garro. So here's the Garro book. Now this is the shortest book in the Siege of Terra, only at about 130 pages. So hard to compete with all the other books on this list, and it's similar to Sons of Selenar, another novella. My only criticism with this one is that it came out after the Warhawk novel, where it clearly takes place before the Warhawk novel, because Mortarion is still alive. And also Garro's actions at the end kind of are a lead-in and a precursor to how the Khan defeats Mortarion at the end of his book. Now, being that this book is really short, there's not a whole lot of highlighted moments, but I'll read the quote on the back of the book. "I have faced death many times against impossible odds, and I still live. There must be a reason by the throne. Once I was told that I was of purpose. I choose to hold to that still." I really like that quote because, you know, his purpose was to serve the Emperor, and at the end he makes that gash in Mortarion's neck that helps the Khan defeat him. My absolute favorite part of this book is when Garro is dying at the end, and instead of going into the warp and all the demons and all that, you see the Emperor and the Emperor's light show up and kind of guide him into his embrace, thus adding credence to that theory that the Emperor can protect souls in the warp from chaos. So really short, but really enjoyable to me. At my rank number 11, the third book in the Siege of Terra series, we have The First Wall. Now this takes place about midway through the siege. Perturabo is very prominent in leading the Chaos Legions against Dorn and the Loyalists. There's not a lot of real things that the demons can do yet because the Emperor's barrier is still up, and Horus is still pretty comatose, so we get to see a very grindy part of the battle during this book. Alright, so The First Wall, and this is down here at number 11 at my list, and it's really tough to do that because Perturabo is probably my favorite Traitor Primarch in the Siege, and toward the end of the Heresy, he became my favorite, leapfrogging Magnus. And he shines in this book. This is all about him and his siege of the palace. And there's really a lot of good parts in this book. I mean, you have Karn leveling up, you have the Iron Warrior's Trident, Malcador's fighting a demon with Custodes, all of that stuff I really liked is great. I wasn't the biggest fan of the kind of Imperial Guard that was making its way there. I was caught off guard by the fact that they were traitors. I know a lot of you caught that earlier on. I was caught off guard, so I did like that, but that was just a lot of the book that I wasn't super interested in, even though a lot of times the Imperial Army I do enjoy. So, you know, all that combined, there was some real highs, and then there was some dragging on this really large book, and that's why I had it down here at number 11. Still enjoyed it, like I said about all these, but down at 11. Number 10 on my list, Fury of Magnus, the third and final novella of the series. And if this was a longer full book, I would probably have it a little bit higher because I really like Magnus's arc, and this kind of concludes it, even though he pops up later in the siege as well. This is basically Magnus's journey to try to come face to face with the Emperor and find his final shard to complete himself. So Fury of Magnus had some of my favorite parts of the Siege of Terra. Magnus kind of saving all the people from the destruction of the wall, showing that he still had his goodness in him. I loved the chess match between Magnus and Malcador. We've been talking about the whole series up until this point. Who's the stronger Psyker, Magnus or Malcador? And in this scene, we get to see who is the stronger Psyker when Magnus essentially turns Malcador to dust. So that was a really cool discussion and moment. And then finally at the end, we get Magnus arriving at the Emperor's throne. And for someone that felt like Magnus' story was so tragic, it was like incredible seeing him get there, seeing Vulcan there, and Vulcan and him having the duel after Magnus' conversation with the Emperor, which blew my mind at this point. And I was like, felt like it was a gut punch when the Emperor offers Magnus one last choice to join the Imperium, assuming that he would be the leader of the Grey Knights and maybe sitting on the throne. But that last twist of the knife where the Emperor says he would have to, like, basically destroy his old legion and get rid of them. And, you know, to Magnus's credit, he can't do it, but it's also so frustrating because we know the bargain with chaos that Magnus made. Now, later on, we'll talk about another book that kind of flips this conversation on its head. But at this moment, I loved that part, and I just was crushed, where essentially Magnus makes his final step into transcending into a demon Primarch. So Fury of the Magus I really liked. Due to the fact that's a novella, I had to put it down toward the lower end at number 10, but really good book. And if there's one novella in the Siege of Terra you should get, definitely get this one. Number 9 on my list, Mortis. This is the 5th book in the Siege of Terra and very much focused on the traitors making pretty much the last push through the last wall. I believe it's the Mercury Wall. Titans are featured heavily, as you can see, but there's also a lot of history and a lot of plot lines with the Perpetuals. This is the book where the tide turns completely into the traitors' favor. Mortis is a beastly book. I think it's either the longest book in the series or the second longest behind End in Death Volume 2. This book a lot of people were thrown off about because the name is Mortis, signifying the Legio Mortis, and there's actually very little Titan fighting in this until toward the end. The Titan fighting in this book I did enjoy. I like my Titan fighting in small doses, not the entire book. I did like the connections back to the book Titan Death, but my favorite parts of this book were the parts in the warp between the Emperor and Horus. Just like in John French's first book, The Solar War, I love those scenes, and they were like little teasers over the books of us getting there. So he uses the same format in this one, and there's actually one really cool part in I believe it's the second interaction they have in the warp where the Emperor really shows his power. And at the end of that mini chapter, he says right at the end, looking at Horus, "And I wait for you." And at the time I read that as kind of like a cool, strong show of force by the Emperor, but given the last words he says to Horus in the final book, very neat connection there. Now, other things, we have the companions with Old Person and Giant Grammaticus. I thought that was kind of cool. I thought this stuff with Erda and Erebus and that battle was great. Erda is another character that leaves people divided. And in this book, we really have a cool part with the Dark Angels recapturing the Hollow Mountain, which is going to be essential for later on in the series. And I did like having Zahariel back and Cypher and all that kind of dynamic with them. So overall, this book is not everybody's favorite. I have it toward the bottom of the list at number 9. But I did enjoy it. I just think it's very long for a lot of people and maybe not as advertised, similar to maybe Prospero Burns. And if people are not fans of the Perpetual plotline, then this book maybe is a little rough. So there we have it at number 9, Mortis. At number 8 on my list, we have The Solar War, the very first book in the Siege of Terra series. And this book kind of gets us all introduced and up to speed, all the main characters, all the pieces in place, and takes place completely in the solar system. It's very unique in that context, so we get to see the Void battle before the war starts in earnest on Terra. So at number 8 on my list, we're back with John French in The Solar War, first book in the series. Once again, I'm going to echo that statement with I love the part with the Emperor and Horus talking in the warp. I thought John French really did that well so that we got tastes of their interactions but kept them separate all the way until the later books in the Siege. The excitement I had for this book, like many of you, my blood was pumping. And it was crazy because it's all out in the solar system. There's really nothing on Terra in this book. It's the only book that's like that in the series. The map in the beginning of this book, the special edition, is my favorite map because it's got the solar system and where all the traders are coming from and so forth. I love that aspect of it. You get some big name character battles in this book. Abaddon versus Jubal Khan, Horus Axeman versus Sigismund and Fafnir Rand. You get the return of Samus from book number 1. It's neat looking back in the Dramatis Personae where Samus is called the End and the Death, before we even knew what the last book's titles were. Dorn with his big battle with Samus at the end. This book has so much going on into it, and the solar system warfare was really cool. Shout out to Angron surfing the Conqueror into the solar system toward the end of the book. That was really cool too. So I thought this book was really good in bringing all our characters to the forefront, being action-packed, and kind of just like giving us that feeling like, oh shit, the siege has started and we're not even into Terra yet. So excellent book, right in the middle of my ranking for the Siege of Terra, and that's all I really got to say about this one. At number 7, we have The Lost and the Damned, the second book in the Siege of Terra series, and where the battle kicks off on the ground of Terra. This is very kind of trench warfare, and you get a lot of perspectives from both the traders and the Imperial kind of line trooper side. There's plenty of epic battles in this, and the traders are essentially sieging the outskirts of the Imperial Palace. Whereas the first wall, one of the parts I didn't enjoy as much was the Imperial Army regiments. In The Lost and the Damned, that I think is one of the strengths of the book, because the traders have just arrived on Terra, they just landed, and you get to see so much of the grind and the experience from your average trooper, most notably Katsuhiro, everybody's favorite Imperial Guardsman, and I thought that was just really good to set the tone for the battle beginning in earnest on Terra. You get some awesome scenes of leadership with Sanguinius in this book, and you pretty much have like an introduction and touching point for all the characters. You get to see some cool scenes with the traders and their kind of like power dynamics as they're starting this siege, and the back and forths and animosity between them. We get to touch on characters that we haven't seen in a while, like Raldoron has some parts in this. Gender Strivok has a part in this. They both together. And then you're just getting like various captains across the board, across all the legions. I think this book really varies the legions the most because, everybody's kind of alive at this point still. So as the siege goes on and people start falling off, you get less and less in that. So this was a really cool opening to the siege. It was written really well. It was really action-packed. The book isn't like crazy long and has really good pacing. So it was just a really good overall book and an enjoyable read. It doesn't quite reach the level of the books that are about to happen, but I do think it's in that top tier before we go into like almost what I would consider A and S tier books from this point onward. So just really solid book, number 2 in the series and number 7 on my list. Coming in at number 6, we also have the 6th book in the Siege of Terra series, Warhawk. Now this is heavily focused on the White Guard's charge to retake the Lion's Gate spaceport, but of course we will cover and check in with all the characters up until this point. This is also the book where Sigismund becomes the Emperor's champion, so that is a heavy plot point in this book and a great overall book. So with Warhawk at number 6, I was super excited to read this. I had been waiting for the Chris Raitt book up until this point. Scars and especially Path to Heaven were 2 of my favorite books in the main series, and I just wanted to get that Khan-focused book, that Mortarion versus Khan battle that never really got to conclude in Scars. and this book was awesome. Aside from being very well written, I really liked the kind of introduction and the stuff about the Death Guard in this book. And the Death Guard, I will say, are my least favorite legion in the Horus Heresy. I just find them very boring. I know there's a lot of Death Guard fans out there. But I really loved like getting into their mindset with their fall to Nurgle, and as they were just plodding all toward the Lionsgate spaceport. It was just really cool to read about. On the flip side, I love the White Scars characters. I mean, obviously we have Shiben Khan, but there was other characters in here in that lead up to the final surge to the Lionsgate spaceport. Additionally, one of the best parts of this book is Sigismund's arc in becoming the Emperor's champion and finding the Black Sword. His duel with Karn is something we've been waiting for such a long time, and definitely one of the most badass parts of the book. I thought the orbital plate stuff was, kind of cool way to kind of justify them getting there. And then the battle between the Khan and Mortarion. I mean, if I had to pick probably a favorite part of this book, it would have to be that. That was just one of the best Primarch on Primarch battles that I've read about. Maybe later on I'll do a ranking on my top Primarch battles. It was just a real cool dynamic with Khan essentially just getting his shit kicked in for the first half of it, but his like jabs at Mortarion and the dialogue was just really surprising. And then when he drops those lines about that he has the better endurance and so forth, something that Mortarion prides himself on, and then how Mortarion was weak for falling to chaos and everything like that. I thought it was great, and the final banishment in Mortarion was done in an excellent way, as well as the mourning of the White Scars of their fallen Primarch. Even though, there was that sliver that he was still alive. Just a really good book, very focused on the White Scars in the Death Guard, so you have to be ready for that, but just written so well, and number 6 on the list. At my rank number 5, we have The End in the Death Volume 2, the second to last and longest book of the series, coming in at over 700 pages. This bridges the gap between Volume 1 of The End of the Death and the final book, End in Death Part 3. So there is a lot of filler in here, but there is some epic moments culminating in the final battle between Horus and Sanguinius. So I really went back and forth between my 4th and 5th selections on the ranking, but ultimately it came down to The End in the Death Volume 2 at number 5. Now this is an incredibly long book in the series, and though many people will say, oh, there's too much filler and it's too long and they drug out the last 3 books, I'm not one of them. I thought having the last 3 books of the series was great. Don't cut my Horus Heresy short. I loved it. I was happy they were trying to squeeze everything in, and Dan Abnett made that decision. Now, I do understand what people do say about the filler on this. There is a lot of just like action-packed battles all over the place. I think it was like Zephin and Fafnir Ron were fighting this trench warfare for a long time. And though that was all cool, it could have been a little too much. Now, aside from that, I mean, this book has so many epic parts. We will save the Sanguinius and Horus fight for the end because that is my favorite part of this book. You had the coming together of Loken and Ol Pearson and Litu, and them getting the Emperor to give up the Dark King. You have Malcador on the throne and continued thoughts from the first book on him. You have Valdor's group and Sanguinius's group and the Emperor's kind of group all going through the Vengeful Spirit together. But ultimately, the culmination of this book is the battle between Sanguinius and Horus, and how well I felt Dan Abnett did that. It ended unexpectedly for me. I mean, the first part of the battle, which is kind of like spread out throughout the book once he gets there, is written as if it was Sanguinius fighting Primarch Horus, and it's very one-sided with how Sanguinius is beating him during that part. I felt like that was a really true reflection of what it would be like for them to fight. And even though Sanguinius has had like countless moments up until this point, you're still seeing him as that peerless warrior against the War Master. And Sanguinius is very injured at this point from his fight with Angron. But then it transitions into phase 2, which kind of caught me off guard, where Horus kind of unlifts the veil of his true power, and it is just rough. I mean, Sanguinius fights valiantly as he is just a broken person at that point. But ultimately, like Dan Abnett writes it, Horus beats him like a dog, and it was just sudden and visceral, and I had like an empty pit in my stomach during that part. So the Sanguinius and Horus part was the best part leading up to it. I like how Sanguinius had that like conversation with Ferrus Manus, or the soul of Ferrus Manus, leading up to it. There was some good dialogue exchange there. But this book is very big, but very good, filled with a lot of good things. I can understand the criticisms of it being too long, but for my stance on it, I have it at number 5 in the ranking. And my 4th highest ranked book in the Siege of Terra, Echoes of Eternity. And everything is congested into the final gate of the siege, the Eternity Gate, where Sanguinius and the Blood Angels and all the remaining loyalists are making their desperate last stand to hold the traitors out. This is a very visceral story, but an awesome, fast-paced story filled with climactic moments. So I had debated The End of the Death Volume 2 here because I really love the trilogy of those books. But at the end of the day, I had to put Echoes of Eternity at number 4. Aaron Dembski-Bowden, you know, when he writes his books, he writes bangers. Some of the best books in the whole Horus Heresy. And this was the book completely focused on the Blood Angels, which we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for decades to see Sanguinius defend the Eternity Gate, and we surely got it here. Now, aside from the awesome battles, back-to-back battles between Sanguinius and Ka'Bandha, and then Sanguinius and Angron, there's a bunch of other good stuff in this book. I mean, you have the whole backstory of the Blood Angels through Nasser Amit's eyes. You actually get a lot of backstories between Sanguinius and the Emperor in this book. You also get Zephon and Arkan Land, and they have a lot to go through in this book, which was very enjoyable, being characters from previous books. And even though Sanguinius has had so many moments in the siege, there was nothing better than his battle between Angron and ripping the nails out of his head. And on the flip side, Ka'Bandha's battle was also really cool too. It ended up being kind of like a warm-up, but I really enjoyed the mini backstory we got about Ka'Bandha and his time in the warp. I think the real highlight line in this book has to be Amit's eat shit trader to Kargos. That just hit me by surprise, and I remember just like yelling at F yeah when I read that part. But overall, this book, like all of ADB's, is like so good and written so well. Also in this book, we get another Primarch battle that I did not expect to get again, with Vulcan and Magnus fighting in the webway. I thought this was great because ADB had been like teasing, or not teasing, but it was blatant that Magnus was trying to attack the Emperor through the webway portal on the throne. That was a big part of the Chaos plan, and which was pretty cool because Magnus obviously was very scorned and turned to demonhood in the Fury of Magnus book. But that battle was great, and you know, Magnus was just like destroying Vulcan countless times. But what I liked even better was the dialogue between Magnus and Vulcan. And let me know if you took it this way, but the way I interpreted was a little bit into the conversation. It's actually the Emperor taking over and talking to Magnus and basically breaking down all the mistakes Magnus had made and why the Emperor would not ever be able to take him back into his service. And then Magnus's like crushing realization of that, or maybe his non-belief of that. I thought that was a really, really good scene and another one of my favorite moments. We also get that poignant signal from Reboot Guilliman to end the book, and I think Lothair Sarin intercepts it. I thought that was like a perfect way to end the book because he's finally coming, even though he's prevented from being here right now, and it was very heartfelt, him writing to Sanguinius specifically. Echoes of Eternity, fantastic book, number 4 on my list. Now we're jumping into the final 3. At number 3, we have The End in the Death, Volume 1, Dan Abnett's first part of the final 3 volumes of the final book. It is one book. This is where the Emperor finally rises, Malcador takes his place, and the battle on the Vengeful Spirit begins, leading up to the climactic showdown between Horus and the Emperor. So with The End in the Death, Volume 1, I had so much hype leading up to this book. It was the beginning of the end in the death. Probably the biggest moment for me, or the biggest theme in this book, was the whole mystery of the Dark King. I don't know if everybody liked that part of it, but I was like really like obsessed with it while I was reading. Like, who is the Dark King? Is it Horus? Is it the Emperor? Is it Lorgar? You know, etc. And it starts off right from the beginning with Samus giving his little, intro speech thing. So as the book went on, and Ahriman and Acte and all these characters are talking about the Dark King, I was just like in my mind like really obsessed with that. I did think by the conclusion of this book that the Emperor was going to be the Dark King, and then we do find that out in the second book. But that was probably my favorite overall theme. Other moments were really awesome. Obviously, Malcador taking the throne was really good, and all the emotions around that. A lot of the insight between the Emperor and Sanguinius during that scene, when Sanguinius originally isn't allowed to go on the Anabis mission, but then the Emperor allows him after they have their conversation. Obviously, the scene where the Custodes turn on the Emperor because Horus is so powerful and forces them to, for 2 reasons. The Custodes are like, it's almost impossible for them to turn to chaos, and I know they're not technically turning to chaos here, but to show how powerful Horus is in that way, but at the same time to watch the Emperor, kill like 60 Custodes and actually get to see him fight for the first time in a while. And that scene is only about like a half or 2/3 through the book. So, we actually get a lot of action between the Emperor and Sanguinius and Valdor on the Vengeful Spirit, as well as Dorn in the City of Dust. So this book is just filled with so many good things, so many good nuggets. I referenced Ahriman before, when he's in the library or the Hall of Lang with Cinderman and Mauer and that whole crew, Loken meeting up with them, and then the book ending with Loken boarding the Vengeful Spirit. This book just like was a lot of what I've been waiting for from start to finish, and then also left on that big cliffhanger with the Dark King. So that is why this one is number 3 for me. My second favorite book in the Siege of Terra series, The End and the Death, Volume 3, concluding the final battles of the Horus Heresy with the Emperor and Horus's showdown taking center stage. There's also the aftermath of that battle in this book, but very action-packed. And I've never seen a longer battle than this one, and it was awesome. So The End and the Death, Volume 3, my second favorite book in the Siege of Terra, and you guys now know what my favorite book will be. But let's talk about this a little bit more. This book, I do have a couple little criticisms of this book. I thought the ending after the big conflict was very rushed, and that's why I'm really excited for the Era of Ruin anthology. I hope it fills in a lot of the gaps that we didn't get at the end of this book. And remember, technically this is one giant 3-volume book, so I can understand a little bit Abnett with that. But the rest of this book is just so good to me. I mean, obviously we have the Emperor versus Horus, and that fight pretty much ranges through 2/3 of the book, is much different than the Sanguinius versus Horus fight, which was very traditional in the first phase and even in the second phase where Horus just, dominates him. But in this book, obviously the lead up was huge, but this book they have so many different phases of the fight, with the initial openings to the metaphysical phase to the gritty very end of it. I personally loved when they were fighting throughout the warp. I loved the different interpretations from Litu to Loken to Cataltus Dusk's points of view on this fight. What else are we talking about? I got really obsessed with the tarot. I know a lot of people aren't into the tarot, but it's so funny because I read this book and then I happened to play the game Cyberpunk, which has a bunch of tarot stuff in it. And then I even went to a Renaissance festival later on and got a tarot reading. And this was kind of the seed that was getting me, really into the tarot. I love kind of like the reveals here, especially at the end when, that Astronomicon plot was building up. Ultimately is the final fuel the Emperor needs to defeat Horus. And I do love when Horus lets go of the power and realizes in that final moments when the Emperor kind of like mentally reveals to him, and Horus realizes that everything that he did was wrong and that he ruined everything essentially. And he does come to that realization throughout the end. The Emperor was right. I know a lot of fans, believe that. But in that final moments, it is written that way. And then he begs the Emperor to kind of finish him and kill him. I love how the Chaos Gods are there throughout the whole battle, and the Emperor, really doesn't even talk to Horus as a person because, as he said, his son is dead. And he's talking to the Chaos Gods, especially during that first introduction. You killed my son. Why? But at the very end, right before he kills Horus, I wait for you and I forgive you. He had said earlier in the John French Mortis book, I wait for you, when they were in the warp. So I loved that ending. I hated how Loken was finished with Erebus. I think a lot of people that was like the biggest gut punch as well, like right up there with the Argyle kill, maybe even worse. It was fitting, it made sense, but it was brutal, and I'm still mad about it. If I could change it, I probably would. But it was a cool way to write that in. As for other parts of this book, Dorn and Valdor's kind of like team up as they're going through and battling through the Vengeful Spirit. I thought that was cool. I obviously love the Emperor scene when he destroys all the word bearers, and Litu says we can take them, and the Emperor says we can, and he just destroys everybody. So a lot of good play with all those characters. I like the Perpetual storyline. I loved how the culmination of Grammaticus and Ulf Pearson's plot lines prove very important right at the end to help the Emperor. And Ulf Pearson, that moment where he's giving the Emperor the knife and he's telling him to get up, and that he regretted turning his back on him and he will be by his side moving forward if he would just get up. I thought that was very emotional, and another like kind of acknowledgement that the Emperor's plan was correct all along, even if the execution wasn't the best. So I could do an entire 30-minute, hour-long video on this book and many of the others, to be honest, but very good moments. Number 2 on my list, and I loved it. I loved the conclusion. At number 1, Saturnine by Dan Abnett, my favorite book in the Siege of Terra series. This book is a page turner. It takes place about halfway through the Siege of Terra, and What makes it so special is just the pacing, the characters, the epic moments. This is one of the few books where the Loyalists actually have a very high moment in the Siege of Terra, and it is an astounding read. So, Saturnine, number 1 in the Siege of Terra. I think there are a lot of people that would put this number 1, and kind of the initial thoughts and the initial magic to this book was it was book 4 in the series, and when it got announced in the title, I had no idea what it was about. I knew the Saturnine fleet, and I assumed it was going to be something with the space battle or whatever like that, but I had no idea it was going to reference the Saturnine wall and just be like another step in the Siege of Terra leading to the culmination, but just have so many great things. This was the Loyalist like kind of comeback novel where Dorn just shows his mettle. Perturabo also has good showing in this book, the way he manipulates Abaddon and Fulgrim and kind of executes his plan. So I did like aspects of the traitor part, but most of the highlights are going to be centered around the Loyalist. So let's just shoot off a bunch of my favorite moments. Camba Diaz on the bridge. That was just written so brilliantly. What a last stand. I had chills during my spine during that. And obviously just like the culmination of all the Loyalist heroes. I mean, when I was early on reading this book, I was like telling myself, I think we're bringing the best of the best all together. I could see it happening. Garro and Loken and Baal Septimus and Endred Har from the Black Shields, and I was like, this is going to be epic. And it reminded me of like that Game of Thrones episode toward the end of the series where they go north of the wall and you have all like the core hero characters. That's what this was, and those battles at the end were epic. Loken getting his revenge on Aximand, and Garro killing some of the Sons of Horus. Them coming this close to getting Abaddon, and especially when Garro's like screaming, no, when he gets teleported away. And obviously Abaddon's self-monologue in that scene was just some of the best writing too. This book was just so good. Dorn versus Fulgrim on the wall with Sigismund there. Such a freaking good book. I loved it. I even loved the Urda reveal and all the background. I know it was kind of out of nowhere, and I could see why people didn't like that. But it finally explained the scattering of the Primarchs and, you know, some of that plot line that we really didn't have. It also gave a lot of good insight into the Emperor, which I was really happy about. We get introduced to Litu, who's obviously a very prominent character for the remainder of the series. So this book was just really, really good. I think this was the fastest book that I read during the siege, and I think I got to go back and read this as well as all the other ones again because, you know, just loved it. So the Siege of Terra, in my view, in general, was a success. I was not upset about them dragging it out. I, in fact, loved it. And as you can see up there, I have all those books. And I do, you know, I might not have time to read the entire Horus Heresy again, but I do plan on either reading or maybe listening to the Siege of Terra again just to get another take on it. But anyway, Saturnine, number 1 in a fantastic series. All right, everybody, that wraps up the Siege of Terra rankings. I hope you enjoyed it. Love talking about the Horus Heresy, especially its thrilling conclusion. Please let me know if you agreed with my rankings or if you disagreed. Let me know what your top book was. Let me know how you felt about the End and Death trilogy. I would love to engage with you guys in the comments. And please send in your rankings too. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Otherwise, stay tuned for upcoming videos. Keep on collecting, keep on having fun, and have a great day.